Right, we now go on to the final session of the day, and this is where we've invited members of the panel that produced the Adonis report, including Lord Adonis himself, to respond to some questions put by the audience. And in a remarkable step forward, we're going to allow some questions from the audience in this one, although what we're going to do is we'll start off with a question that somebody sent in, since somebody bothered to send it in, and then when the panel have replied to it, and they don't all need to reply to everyone as always, then they can we'll ask for a question or two from the floor, so don't despair. Okay, well the first, sorry, I should introduce the team. Andrew Adonis, Heidi Mottram, Paul Woolston, Bridget Rosewell, whom I've known for years, and Jonathan Ruffer. As you know, a couple of the members of the review team couldn't be with us, as Andrew gave their apologies earlier. Okay, first question I want to ask, and this is, I suppose this is it's the core of what this whole review is about, achieving sustainable economic growth. The report suggests that further research into whether sustainable economic growth is more likely to be driven by supporting established companies to continue to grow rather than investing in an increasing number of startups would go against decades of policy, but does it have merit? Andrew, why don't you start?
Can I first of all respond to Chris's really brilliant speech earlier? He's a great colleague in the House of Lords. When he started, I wasn't sure whether he's in the Labour Party or out of it at the moment. I think by the end I was very clear. At least I think Grimsby will have some view on that. I absolutely agree with him on skills and the centrality of skills to our region by region to the economic development agenda, and we put it at the heart of the report here, and I think that really does need to be taken forward. And if I said there was one single recommendation in the report which could be transformational, it is doubling the number of youth apprenticeships and all that could lead to in due course. And that will be a dynamo that not only provides a bigger pool of skilled workers for growth and new companies, which is very important because that's a huge issue for them. It would also transform aspirations amongst young people who are not on a track to go to university. And our biggest problem in the school system at the moment, in my view, is that the half who go into university, they have a through train through to established and successful courses in future life. Those that don't face a minefield in terms of where they go, opportunities and so on. And getting, as in Germany and other continental countries, having a well-established apprenticeship route through to employment is critically important. I agree with him also on not having endless local authority reorganisations. Wearing my national hat, we're looking at what happens to LEPs. I think reflecting on the experience of the last 3 years, it would be a disaster if there's a change of government in 18 months' time, if it simply seeks to abolish all that's there at the moment and start again. I think that was a huge mistake in respect of the RDAs, and it will be a huge mistake in respect of the LEPs too. Where I disagree with him is on infrastructure, where I think as a country we've underinvested in it in the last generation. The reason why the South East gets such a large proportion of it is because the tap is so tightly screwed on, and when it releases a bit, of course the bit that is absolutely bursting at the seams in terms of population growth and the need for new infrastructure is the South East. So John Armid, who's led a big review for the Labour Party on how we plan infrastructure, and has recommended an independent National Infrastructure Commission, which I strongly support. He rather provocatively yesterday said that in his whole, and he's a former chief executive of Network Rail, the Olympics and all of that, in his whole career, he can only think of one major piece of infrastructure which, in retrospect, we might not have built. But Chris won't like to know what the answer was. The Humber Bridge. So we'll ask Chris late in a moment whether he thinks that one should be closed as the first step forward in not having wasteful infrastructure spending. In terms of companies, I'm a pragmatic politician. What we need is lots more startup companies, and we need to be fostering better the most successful companies to grow. I don't think, for me, as a politician seeking to choose between those two is a good thing. We need both. As I said in my remarks earlier, we don't have enough companies in the North East, full stop, and we don't have enough high-growth companies. It stands to reason, actually, that the more companies you've got and the more entrepreneurial zeal that you've got in establishing them, the more growth companies you'll have in due course too. But it's not just small companies that become growth companies. Of course, it's medium and large companies that do so too, and their skills is a major impediment to their growth. So in my experience of talking to companies, including the meeting I had with the Entrepreneurs Forum this morning, is helping them to export where they need advice, support and guidance. I think the role of UKTI and those who can really help them get a foothold in export markets is also absolutely critical.
Bridget, would you see a split there?
No, I definitely wouldn't. You need both established companies to be successful and you need startups as well. In fact, startups, and I've done 3, what you need is you need established companies to sell your stuff to. So there's a symbiosis, if you like, between getting more successful startups and getting more growth out of established companies. And what really matters then is, I think, not so much to think about should we have startups, should we be pushing established companies, but to think about where the supply chains are and the linkages between companies and between who I'm going to sell to, who I'm going to buy from, in order to be as effective and as efficient as I can be. Generally speaking, small companies do business locally. Yes, you can do a bit of export, and as you grow, you may do export, and I absolutely agree on the support for that first export contract that Andrew is talking about. But nonetheless, below, even if you say you go to the most internationally oriented part of the country, whether it's in trade, in goods as in here, or in services in London, most companies are selling and buying from other local businesses. So the more integrated you can get, the more contacts you've got, the better your network in that supply chain, the more successful you will be. I very much agree with Christopher about having successful companies that are based in your region or indeed in your country. Business is becoming more internationalised, and the range of ownership is also becoming more internationalised, even for companies that are headquartered in the UK. So getting that actually even more strengthens the need for those decision-making networks and for devolution to be powerful enough that the way that the jigsaw fits together can actually be operated successfully. I don't think that trying to wind back internationalisation is a good thing. We need trade and growth are intimately connected, but we do need to try and make sure that the decisions are taken close to where they are actually being implemented.
Thank you. Heidi.
Yeah, I mean, one of the roles that I performed on the review that Andrew asked me to look at was to try to see if there were lessons that we could learn from other regions that had somehow or other outperformed, and we were looking, I guess, for the golden bullet or something that we could perhaps copy or just bring into the region. And what came back and what we tried to put into the report is there isn't, if you like, a formula in that way, but there were undoubtedly some themes that created, and I'll address the startup big company thing, because that's, I think, just embedded within it. But the themes that we were trying to bring out in the report were, first of all, the region does have to have a clear sense of leadership and strategy, and that's why we were very pleased and were very supportive that the combined authority had already, if you like, got off the blocks, and there was a clear idea about that combined with the LEPs. The region then needed a skills agenda in relation to the kinds of things that it thought that it was good at, the kind of businesses that it was good at. And we talked about advanced manufacturing, we talked about pharmaceuticals, we talked about creative and digital, and some of these sectors where we felt that we had really good strengths. Then they need connectivity, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And then finally, this concept which we talked about earlier with Professor Sambach about open innovation and encouraging that. Those were the themes. So there wasn't, if you like, a formula that said focus on startups or focus on big companies. What they were saying is do all of these things and you will create jobs in both of these types of businesses. As Bridget says, small businesses will innovate and think about ways to set up things that can then support big businesses, which in themselves have got higher skill jobs in some of the areas that we thought that we were good at. So that's what we were trying to bring through in the overarching themes. It wasn't as specific as it's all about startups or all about big businesses. And I'm pleased to hear a lot of what's been said this morning is following those themes. If I can, I'm going to do another, I think it's about infrastructure thing back at you, Chris. I guess, we have a region here that is remote, if you want to use that word. I think that's probably too negative a word, but it's a region that needs to be connected both to the rest of the country and to the wider world. So I do think that some elements of infrastructure, and in particular transport, and wearing my CBI hat, business focuses a hell of a lot on transport in this part of the world. It's fantastic to hear David speaking earlier about how close we might be to a transatlantic link. That's vitally important. High-speed links to London and to other parts of the country, and then connectivity within the region is really important too. So I think infrastructure in certain respects is key. I'll be very parochial and say, wearing my Chief Executive of Northumbrian Water, at least we've got fantastic water infrastructure here, and we should call people who need water supplies to this region, because that is one of our absolute strengths, along with a number of others in infrastructure. So we shouldn't always focus on what we haven't got. We should sell at what we have got as well.
Well, can we have a pipeline to the south, please? Paul, do you feel torn in your role with NELEP between helping the small players and the big players?
Not at all. I agree with largely what Bridget said, is that there's a symbiotic relationship. And if you look, I don't think we were saying what's in the question, actually. I think what we were saying was that we should identify our strengths and build on it. So if I I mentioned this morning, the City Deal proposal that we have that's led by Sunderland City Council and supported by South Tyneside, that's to look at how we build on advanced manufacturing and with some key players, but critically with the supply chain. And that supply chain will come from small and medium-sized enterprises. So you shouldn't look at them as separate issues. They definitely support each other. And I suspect that the real growth will come from the SMEs, not just from the larger companies.
Excellent. Now, I'm going to take a question from the audience, if anybody has one. I'd be really interested if there was a question from somebody from the sort of small business part of the world because there were several questions actually sent in relating to aspects of small business that maybe felt they were being left out of this. Does anybody feel like putting in full penneth? No? Or any other questions somebody would like to ask on this? Right. Yes, sir. There's a microphone will come to you in a trice. Probably everybody in the room knows who you are except me, but I'd like to know, so do please tell us.
Okay, I'm John Goddard from Newcastle University and advisor to BIS and the European Commission on regional innovation. The question to the panel is about the different roles between strategy, which we've had in the review, governance and accountability, and the third heading is animation, making it happen. And it does seem to me that in the first thing, we're doing well on the strategic stuff. There is an issue in terms of governance and accountability, which Lord Haskins touched upon, in terms of political accountability. But in the governance terms, there is also the relationship between the region and national government, where what we are doing is contributing to the national benefit, and relationships with national bodies like TSB, UKTI, and the National Industrial Strategy. So that's, as it were, upwards. And then there is, within the region, the animation role. And I'd be interested in how the panel sees the role of the LEP in animating a lot of the things that are going on. Because what I've seen, observing this region with other regions around the world, going back to Heidi's point, is there's lots and lots of organisations trying to do things. And it's the extent to which there is this animation role. So the headings are strategy, governance and accountability, and animation within the region.
Okay, how do we animate people? Let's take that one. Who'd like to start? Go on, Bridget.
I think that I want to start with the governance and accountability part of the question, actually, because I think that leads in both directions. And I think it's how we use the devolution word, if you like. Now, devolution can be both political, but it's also organisational, and it's about both power and about money. So I think one of the elements of animation is about how you take responsibility, and that's then about the accountability and the money. So if we take the infrastructure example, which I am also particularly keen on, and indeed have been fighting the infrastructure argument for decades now, then how do you pay back? If, say, you're investing in some piece of infrastructure, how is that money going to be paid back? And traditionally, all these investments are made without any thought of that accountability or any thought about how you're going to pay it back. It's all just, oh, there's some benefits somewhere. But if there's money being spent, then what is it generating? How is that going to be captured? And where is it going to then come back into? As you capture it, you can reinvest it, and you can reanimate, if you like, the new things that you want to do. So it's how can we change the way that local finance is organised at that public sector level to make that happen? Or indeed, how do we rethink at the other end, if you like, for the people involved in a LEP? How can that actually manage resources or find the private finance initiatives? And I think we should be less sniffy about private finance initiative than perhaps we became at some point. If it's well managed and well organised, I think that's a very successful route forward in order that you can bring all these things together to match, to make those links between the strategy, the accountability and the animation. So that would be my way forward.
I should do a plug for Bridget here. There's a very good paper on this issue on her Volterra website. If you look at the business she founded about this whole issue, because I think it's one of those things we all struggle with dealing with.
Thank you.
Anyway, Andrew, I could see you twitching at the end there.
Twitching in agreement, I should say. I entirely agree. I think that one of the issues for the North East, which is what we sought to address with the combined authority too, is getting one strategy. It's very important that we've got a strategy on which we're agreed. If I had to say what has been part of the issue in the North East, it's not been that there hasn't been a strategy. There have been, how can I put it, too many of them. And indeed, I thought a defining moment, really, in terms of really championing the interests of the region was the Green Investment Bank. There's nothing more important for the future of this region than green investment at large. Offshore wind and all of that is going to be a major sector for the economy of the region and hugely important to jobs and growth in the future. When the government put forward the Green Investment Bank and asked for bids for it, the North East came forward not with one but with 4, and it went to Edinburgh. And I think I'm right in saying every other region put forward just one bid. And that's not too much to expect of your leaders, that they can, on something as vital as this, that they can actually have a process in place, a governance arrangement in place that will lead to the best coming forward, everyone championing it, and that then becoming the regional priority. And that's what I hope. That's a concrete example. That's what I hope will be the result of having this combined authority. There's also the Henry Kissinger question too. When I phone Europe, who answers the phone? When you phone the North East, who answers? We know who answers when you phone London. We also know who answers when you phone Scotland. Again, I think the combined authority might help with that too. You cannot have leaders in politics unless people know who they are. And I'm afraid it is a fact that far more people on the streets of our cities in the North East will know who the leader of London is and the mayor of London than will know who is the most significant leadership figure in the North East. Now, leadership on its own isn't, you ought to have good leaders, not bad leaders. T. Dan Smith, I mean, the idea that strong leadership is of itself a good thing is, of course, not correct. But I hope that coming out of this report with the very strong support of the local authority leaders and the business leaders in the North East, what we can get to is having a united single strategy with a united single leadership structure pushing behind it.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to move on to another question, if that's okay. The others will have chances to intervene on other matters, I'm sure. But it's one that certainly bugs me, and I've thought a lot about as well. I did some work on manufacturing after leaving the FT, and there's this great struggle that every time we build up a successful manufacturing or engineering company in Britain, somehow it seems to get snapped up by somebody else just when it's reaching its peak of perfection. And that somebody else is often a foreign company. And I'd like to ask the panel whether they think, A, that's good, and B, is there anything we could do, if they don't think it's good, is there anything they think we could do to make that harder? And I might start with Heidi on this one, if I could, with your CBI hat on.
Okay. I think the general view of businesses in the CBI would be to be agnostic about that, to be perfectly honest. This is a region with a huge number of businesses that have some form of foreign ownership or involvement in them. We've already talked earlier on about the fact that it's the only region in the country with a positive balance of trade. There's probably some direct link going on with that as well. And although I can see that, and I can look very personally to my own business, which is now foreign owned, that not necessarily having some of that decision making here can undermine things. In my experience with businesses in the North East is that they do have a very strong connectivity, and even the business like Nissan, we've always had very strong support in the CBI from their local management and their connectivity and their understanding of the supply chain. So I think business generally would say it's not causing an issue. What's critically important to us in the region is to make sure that all of that ownership just continues to follow this agenda of getting higher skilled jobs and better jobs and following in. And I think some of the businesses that we've got have done brilliantly well in making sure that they build up a local supply chain around them, and we should continue to encourage them to do that.
In my heart, I think it's a bad thing. In my head, it's fine. What I would say that in the review, we talked a lot about, and this is Will Hutton's concept of stickiness.
It was mine.
Was it yours? Sorry, Bridget. Oh, did he pinch it from you? He did. Oh, sorry. Bridget's
it's happened before.
Yeah. And I think that's more comes to the heart of the challenge, really, which is that what we want to do with the likes of innovation is that we want to create businesses that stay here and grow here. That's what we want. We want graduates that come out of university who stay here and work here and build their own businesses. We want to have a region that has the culture where people want to live here. We want to have the right kind of housing, the infrastructure. So that stickiness brings us together and makes it much more difficult for people to leave. I'm much more interested in that than having an acquisition from overseas.
Paul very modestly said he had no opinions on any of these things, but he wanted to say something, and I think this is the point at which you should say it.
So, many call me Jonathan, but...
Jonathan.
I think what the last two have said is right, that it's very easy to think of it as a good thing or a bad thing to have foreign ownership. But the way I look at it, I come from a financial background, is to be aware that in an international world, winner takes all. And so what that tends to mean is that when a smaller business is taken over by a foreign business, the head office will leave to wherever it is that the parent is, and that's obviously a bad thing. But it does give the opportunity of bringing people here who can be game changers, and Nissan would be an obvious example of that, and Hitachi would be another, and there are many examples of that. So I see it as a fact of life that we live in a world, a predatory world, but that actually that throws up as many advantages as disadvantages. And what interests me is, I was quite interested in that question, do we want big companies or small companies? Because this is a battleground in the big companies. An American company doesn't bid for a bloke operating from a garage. He'll be going for probably a quoted company, even if it's quite a small quoted company. But what we don't see are the seeds in the ground. What makes a Roger Federer growing up in down and out canton in Switzerland? What makes him a great tennis player? Now, what one doesn't know with an area are the people who might have been world beaters but weren't. And so, not surprisingly, we're always trying to support the things which have already been a success. And it's clearly right to see what our strengths are and to build on them. there's Glaxo in Barnard Castle, so there's a great tendency to think, well, perhaps we're terrifically good at making drugs. But the really interesting things are the unseen things. And what we have to do, I think, is to create a climate here, both regulatory and in terms of leadership, which not only supports what is there, but somehow is able intuitively to imagine what isn't yet seen, but which is a seed in the ground, any of which could become a big one. And I've strong views on this, and I shall leap into action under any name, I hasten to add, at a later point.
It'd probably be much easier if I called them all Paul, really, wouldn't it? I would have to remember. But Bridget, is there any any economic research that casts any light on this that you're aware of?
It is very much about the centre of where decisions are made. So I think there's no doubt about that. And then, but it's so. Ownership is only one element in that, and I think that the economic research sometimes doesn't distinguish enough about it. It is about the stickiness and the embeddedness, and that was one of the sort of concepts that I was people confused by perhaps a little bit when I first started talking about it. But once that embeddedness is happening, then it's also about managing that change process, because the other thing which I think is true in our world may not have been true in all periods, but I think it's certainly true at the moment, is that we are seeing changing economic structures across the world. We're seeing changing corporate structures also, I think, happening. Big, stable companies with large plant employing lots of people who continue to make the same thing for 50 years, like a large car plant. There aren't very many of them. And indeed, those that are also, as we know, changing all the time, needing new components, needing new designs, new kinds of fuel, etc., and so on. So that change process is what we need to make sure that we're on top of, and that we have the right social and corporate and governance and accountability mechanisms to allow us to take advantage of changing opportunities. I think that's really one of the things that Jonathan's talking about, to take advantage of those opportunities as they emerge, and not to just not to believe we can go on doing the same thing. So that's that. If you do that, then you will continue to have headquarters, because headquarters will go to where those things happen. In fact, you'll be taking over the other companies rather than being taken over.
Heidi.
Yeah, just really, very quickly, just to come back in on this point of stickiness. I think we did get it.
Good.
And there is a lot going on in the region with the bigger companies trying to introduce their supply networks to each other in order to just even build that stickiness even more. We've been doing that a little bit through the CBI, but the Chamber does similar things. I'm very proud that 63% of our supply chain's in the region, and we're trying to get our suppliers to trade with other big businesses in the region, and that is what it's about.
Good. Now, is there another question from the floor, which I'd quite like to be about the subject we're talking about at the moment, if that's possible? Yes, sir. Yep. Oh, it's coming.
Good afternoon. John Craggs from Gen2 Group, which is a housing organisation based in Sunderland. We're providing a lot of housing in the region now, and there's a significant reference in the report to suggest that sufficient good quality housing has a large role to play in any successful region. We're taking on 27 new apprentices in a variety of housing trades. Young people, local people start on Monday, actually. So my question is, to what extent do the panel feel that something like house building, regardless whether it's for rent or sale, is in itself a significant economic driver in the region, as well as being a basic right in any civilized society?
Who'd like to start? Andrew, what about you?
Yes, of course, it's hugely important, and Gen2 is a new shared ownership organisation, isn't it? That's what you've been pioneering in Sunderland, and I know looking to seek to extend that nationally, aren't you? Whereby you pay rent towards ownership in a new and innovative way. So I think that there are two different agendas here. There is a need for additional house building, which is nationwide because of the rate of household formation that we've seen, even in areas that haven't got the population pressures of London and the South East. But there's also the very important point of making this new forms of ownership and renting accessible, and I think innovation of the kind that you're pioneering is also important. So we need both the increase in the building, and we need a positive attitude on the part of local authorities in that respect, which you tend to get in the North East. But we also need more innovation, particularly when it comes to affordable and social housing in terms of tenures.
Any other thoughts on the value of property?
Having recently come from the southeast, where an airing cupboard costs a couple of £1 million, what strikes me is that the housing stock up here is already amazing. I work in Bishop Auckland, and as far as I can see, 2/3 of the town is for sale for prices which are so low that my feeling is that the existing housing stock should be one of the banner headlines on the attractiveness of the region. Now, that isn't at all to say that we don't need new buildings, because without them, it's like a forest. New trees have to grow up to keep the housing stock healthy. But what is very striking is that rather than have a trudge of retirees who come up here because the housing prices are so low and so attractive, I would like to see the current housing stock, certainly in Bishop Auckland, used by people who could be productive for us up here.
I think that I actually don't think housing drives the economy. I think having the right housing stock is certainly a requirement, but actually there's I think a myth that, for example, in the 1930s recovery was driven, actually a myth both that it was driven by housing or indeed that it was driven by rearmament. Actually, if you begin to unpack that, it was driven by new products, new investors, the rise of the consumer industries, women going out to work for the first time on a regular basis. There's a huge amount of innovation which happened, which gave people jobs and incomes and allowed them to buy the houses which were being built. So these things, like everything in an economy, it's a jigsaw. You need to get the right mix of stuff. If there were a silver bullet for managing an economy, we'd have found it by now. Doesn't exist. It's all about that juggling matter. So I think housing is important, but I don't think it's what drives it.
Okay, another question sent in advance. It's quite an interesting one. Who or what are we, is the question. The North East used to be the term to define Tweedside to Teesside. The North East LEP is Tweedside to Wearside. In London, the North East is often used to define the area north of the M62 and east of the Pennines. Who are we? Will there be an open debate on this crucial matter, and who will be responsible for positioning whatever we are called and how? Paul, why don't you go on it? The real Paul this time, I think.
Thank you, and I'm kind of on record. It's a bit like what Roy was saying, that I'm from the North East, and I include the Tees Valley area in the North East. But I think we have two defined sub-regions. We have the North East LEP area, and we have the Tees Valley LEP area, which has its own different characteristics. And it's been touched on earlier that I think that's where we are. But we work very closely together, and Stephen's here, I think, from Tees Valley Unlimited. And some examples which is worth drawing out is around access to finance. We're working very closely together. We will work closely on our European strategy and on transport. So the notion that we aren't working together is wrong. And I think that I'd rather like us to think that we plough on with what we're doing and we work together where it matters. And I think we've got the right relationship. I worry a little bit that we get a bit fixated about that, because I think there's some bigger issues. I think I should be talking definitely to Scotland, but to Norway, to Germany. We shouldn't be hung up a bit, because we've got very good personal relationships, because we are part of the North East together. But as two LEPs, we work very closely, and I think we should let that run.
What's London? Okay, so you're saying, we should worry about what's the North East, but what's London? So I can say it's the GLA area over which Boris presides, but actually, though, he has very few powers, of course. But my mother doesn't think she lives inside the GLA area. She thinks London starts north of the river. She lives in Surrey. So London itself, some people think that's the city of London, which is a square mile. So all of these places have a variety of definitions according to what you're doing at that particular time. And I think it's a real distraction to get hung up on it.
The question reminds me of the Oxford philosopher who used to ask his candidates for places how they could demonstrate to him that the chair in the centre of the room existed, and the guy who got the top marks replied, "What chair?" I'm not sure it's a particularly meaningful question. We all have multiple identities, and there may be sub-regions, and maybe a region, you can debate that. But clearly, whether there's a sub-region or region, we belong to them both, just as we belong to other communities too. The crucial issue is to make a success of them, and to make a success of the communities of which we're a part. And that, in terms of the context of this debate, means the LEP area, which the Local Enterprise Partnership with the local authorities has responsibility for.
Those are good answers, but how do you brand the area? When you're going abroad, when you're seeing a guy who wants to invest in Britain, what do you say?
Well, let me answer that. I think one of the challenges that we have is that we are often branded negatively. I mean, there was that absurd chap who said that he thought that fracking was much too wrong for the southeast, on the basis that the sensibilities of stockbrokers might be offended by it, but it was perfectly all right in the northeast, where there were only sheep and deaf people. Now, it doesn't really matter which LEP area that happened to fall within, and I think that we sometimes miss half the debate in terms of making the case for the northeast. Infrastructure, governance, financing, these are all crucial things, but happy cattle produce more milk, and what's true of cows is true of people, and this is a great place to be. The thing which irritates me beyond measure is when people come and say that they've been up here and they'd had a fantastic time. And you think, well, so what's so surprising about this? This is a world-beating place. And it seems to me that there are two ways that one needs to tackle this. I'm involved in scrubbing up Auckland Castle, which is a major £50 million project. And why am I doing that? The answer is because I want to demonstrate that the Northeast has some things of great loveliness, of world-beating standards. And the thing that got me going was the fact that the church commissioners were trying to steal 13 old masters from it. And the one thing we are quite short of up here are old masters, and that irritated me. But when, what can one do? Well, we're doing two things which I think demonstrate each of the two barrels that matter on this. Mr. Hoo-ha wanted fracking to come up north. Well, deep bore borehole drilling, where in the world is the preeminent technology and conditions? It's here. Newcastle University, Durham University absolutely lead the charge on the technology and understanding of how this works. We sit in Weardale on a 1,500 square mile granite block, which is the hottest entity 1.5 miles underground anywhere in the country except the Cairngorms. Now, one of the things that we are doing a feasibility study on at Auckland is to see if we can heat not only Auckland Castle but the north end of Bishop Auckland with geothermal heat. Because if we can do that in a high-profile entity like Auckland Castle, that will be a poster child to this region that this is something which can be developed. And that seems to me to be important. Now, we're doing something else as well, which is the other thing, which is that when you're dealing with the deep unimagination that nothing except turnips and cow poo exist up here, is that you can be helped by being connected with people who will be one's ambassadors. And a second project that we're doing, which is a feasibility study, which at the moment is part of the Auckland Castle project, but will become, when it comes to the delivery of it, into a separate and quite distinct unit, is the development of a historic theatre theme park with the entity in France which has the Oscar for the best theme park in the world. They get 1.6 million people a year, and the only other place where they are considering doing a similar thing is in Bishop Auckland. And Helen Goodman and Natalie Davison and a number of the rest of us are going out to push this idea to see whether it is commercially viable. It's not something that is going to be done within Auckland Castle because it's a bigger idea than that, but it will utterly transform the region and become the biggest reason for people to come and be entertained, actually in the north of England. If we could get half that 1.6 million, we would have something very lovely. What's in it for Auckland Castle? Well, they own the land on which it would happen. And if we could get the amount that we have invested every year by way of income, then that project will not stagger year by year after I'm dead and buried to bring to keep it going. It will have its own natural life. Now, when people look at the Northeast, they need to have the sense of imagination that what we have is something remarkable. And often it is our ambassadors from outside the region that can first create that circuit breaker to bring people here. But my vision for the Northeast is that first and foremost it is a place of great happiness for people to be in. And then that will bring the seedlings up, the people, the Roger Federers up, who can do remarkable things here. But it will also furnish and nourish the rest of the economic community. And that's why I've come up to the Northeast, because that's what I want to do up here.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to take two more responses. I'm afraid we're coming to the end now, but Heidi, you were waving frantically.
Yeah, just taking it right back, because I think it was an interesting thing that happened when, I think Lord Howell, wasn't it, who who rather stupidly stood up and talked about the desolate northeast. But I mean, he only made himself look more idiotic the following day by saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I actually meant the desolate northwest." But I think much as it made my blood boil, as I'm sure as it made everybody in the room's blood boil about that, you have to kind of reflect that what he was effectively saying is that we were not the centre of his universe. And you know, I think that we have to have a degree of realism. And when I was looking at the work that I was looking at here, it is pretty obvious that the minute that you get outside of our world, the rest of the world within this country probably talks about the northeast as everything from the Teesside north, and the further away you get, it probably gets even more blurred, and people start to talk about the north. So I think for me the lesson that came out is that Teesside does have a distinctive economy versus the economy of the Northeast LEP area, and there may be times when it's appropriate for that language to be working, and we have 2 LEPs working in that way, but there will often be times when the language that we need to be talking about is the language of connectivity and the northeast, because we should be thinking about the audience that we're talking to. I mean, I come from the world of business and customer service, and we should be looking to what is our customer wanting. And if our customer is inward investment, and the best way to sell ourselves is to talk a different language in order to get the best possible outcome, then that's what we should do. If we start fighting with each other and we both lose, it's a little bit like the bank analogy, then this, you know, clearly is counterproductive. So I think I'm really pleased. I work a lot with Paul and with Sandy in the Tees Valley to see those 2 organisations working together more now where they have a common interest, and it's clearly in their interests to do so, and I will only continue to encourage that. There might be times when they want to speak with individual voices, but I think when we're talking to a wider world, we are quite often stronger when we talk about the northeast. But let's think about what we're trying to get and stop thinking about what our own internal issues are, because this is about getting great jobs and prosperity for the northeast.
Andrew, would you like to have the last word?
No, I think I agree with everything Heidi has said.
Okay, well, thank you very much to my panel for answering all the questions that we put to them and a lot more besides. Other questions that we haven't got round to will be answered and published on the website. Now, I have the last list of housekeeping announcements for you. We have to thank the Centre for Life, whose hospitality and banqueting team have been absolutely amazing today, as I'm sure those of you who've had any contact with them will know. I'd also like to thank Yellow Brick Road, who have organised this event with amazing efficiency and pulled it all together, and also Christine Holland for her support on press and PR. Before we break for lunch, a couple of things you have to do. You have to remove all of your belongings and take them with you. You can't leave them in here. And please note where your workshop is located. It's highlighted on a screen behind me. Oh yes, so it is. Please look on the back of your badges to find the number workshop you're attending. Delegate lists for each workshop are posted in the mezzanine area, and a list is available on the main reception desk. A final note, the main reception desk will remain open until 4:30 after the workshops are finished for collection of coats, bags, etc. I hope you enjoy your lunch and the workshops. I thank you for your patience with me today, and I'd ask you to thank the panel for their participation.
See what Nicky Harris